Hey guys, today we're doing something a little special 10 stories, all about my most awkward moments at a friend's house. If you've ever visited someone and felt your stomach drop because something just went wrong, you'll know what I mean. These are the moments that make you replay the scene in slow motion. Laugh later because what else can you do? And then quietly vow to never go back or to never wear those socks again. Each of these is told like a Reddit post I found that sounded too real not to be true, but I'm telling them in the first person, like I lived them. Some are just silly, some are painfully cringe, and one or two are still kind of weird to think about. I'll keep things calm and easygoing between stories, so if you're listening while doing something chill, good choice. Before we jump in, quick thing, say where you're watching from in the comments. I love hearing cities and weird little hometown facts. And if anything I say triggers a memory of your own awkward moment, drop it in the comments. Maybe we'll feature it next time. All right, deep breath. Here we go. Segment 1, the bathroom that betrayed me. If you asked me to name the single most mortifying 5 minutes of my teenage life, this would be it. I'll give you context because context is what makes these stories sink in. It was a Saturday. I was 14. My friend Kyle's house smelled like toasted bread and chili because his mom had made a pot of chili that morning. It was the kind of chili that makes you say words like xanthan to sound like you know what goes into it. Delicious. But, as my digestive system would learn, dangerous. We were playing video games upstairs. You know the scene. Carpeted floor, consoles blinking, sticky soda on the coffee table. An hour in, there's this creeping sensation in my gut, like a low-level alarm going off. I try to ignore it. I play another round. I lose spectacularly. And the alarm escalates to I should not be trusted indoors for another 50 minutes territory. I tell Kyle I'm going to head to the bathroom. He nods, not looking up from his controller, probably on his 20th respawn. So I go. Hallway, carpet, family photos, a vaguely trendy cross-stitch that reads, "Bless this mess." In cheerful font, I get in the bathroom, do what humans do, and when I'm done, I reach for the flush like it's the single redeeming action of my life. I press, and nothing. No satisfying whirl, no mechanized sigh. Just a little gurgle, like the plumbing was whispering the plot twist. I press again. Nothing. The water inches up. If you've never seen the water in a toilet rise slowly, let me help. It looks like bad decision-making with physics. The bowl filled more and more, and suddenly I had the visceral realization that the next noise in this house would be the ancient pipes making a choice. The choice was not mine. Panic is weird. It's both a loud and internal thing. Outwardly, I did some rational stuff. I lifted the tank lid. I looked confidently at the float valve, like I'd had plumbing training. I made the worst 3 decisions one after another. Peer into the tank. Attempt to hold the float down with my hand. Then proceed to imagine every horror movie where water invades a house from the charmingly mundane plumbing systems. Here's the part that haunts me. I couldn't find a plunger. The cleaning cupboard was a myth. There were toothbrushes, a half-full bottle of a scent that could be called either lavender or funeral home, and a stack of magazines from 2010. No plunger. It's like the universe conspires to teach you humility by withholding simple tools. And then the knock. That knock is the thing that wrote the rest of the story in bold letters. "You okay in there?" Kyle's mom's voice, breezy and too close. I said something like, "Yeah, totally fine." And I am not proud of the voice that came out. It was the voice of someone negotiating with fate. I kept whispering to the float valve as if the valve could be bribed. Time dilates in panic. Every second expanded so I could watch tiny moral decisions unfurl. I wiped my hands, washed them twice, because washing twice makes everything seem like it was at least sanitary. I closed the lid on the toilet like that would undo the whole water approaching rim thing. And then I left the bathroom the way one leaves a battlefield. Quick, avoidant eye contact, posture tilted like a man walking a tightrope. The rest of the evening was a study in social acting. Kyle's mom didn't say anything about the toilet, which was both a kindness and a death sentence. If she pretended it hadn't happened, then I had to pretend I hadn't been the one who almost drowned her bathroom. Kyle played on, oblivious. Later, at the end of the night, I heard her mutter to Kyle in a way that made me simultaneously thankful and guilty. The upstairs toilet was acting up. I left that house with a small, secret understanding that I had become a household anecdote. A potential lesson. The kid who overflowed the toilet and fled. Years later, I ran into Kyle at a grocery store. We caught up, laughed about bad pizza. He mentioned the old house, renovations, how they finally got that toilet replaced. I wanted to tell him the truth. I wanted to unburden myself. But that would require bringing back an image of my 14-year-old bladder playing Russian roulette, and he seemed content with the memory he had. So I kept the secret. There's a weird empathy in all of that. The embarrassment is sharp in the moment, but later it becomes a funny part of your story. I tell this now because I still feel the flush of heat in my cheeks when I think about that second flush that never came, and also because it's a tiny human thing. We all have private catastrophes that happened in someone else's house, and we have to live with the way their family remembers it. When I think about it now, I can laugh. It was a childish disaster fixed with new plumbing in time. But for a while there, I thought I'd move to another country to avoid apologies. So if you've ever had to commit a small sin and then leave a house like a magician after a trick gone wrong, I feel you. We've all been there, quietly planning our exit before the next awkward knock. Quick breath. That was a smoky little disaster from my teenage years. Let's move on to something that's about being seen way more than you want to be. The phrase "no doors closed" sounds either very zen or like an invasion of your personal space, depending on your life experience. In Jenna's family, it was one of those Instagram-worthy rules. We keep all doors open because it's about trust. She said with the kind of conviction that comes from having been raised singing family anthems. I learned the policy the hard way. I was 16 and invited to Jenna's for a weekend. She was the kind of friend who did midnight runs to 7-Eleven and believed that popcorn belongs on pizza. The weekend started fine. We watched movies, ate the aforementioned popcorn on pizza abomination, and stayed up talking about crushes and whether our teachers had secretly invented their own dialects. Then bedtime came. I slipped into the guest room and started to change. Sound reasonable, right? Nope. The door to that room was wide open. I thought it would be fine. I thought maybe it's just unlocked. And so I started to change, imagining the sanctity of a towel and a closed door. Then the door opened wider and Jenna's little brother poked his head in. He said cheerfully, "Are you changing in there?" And before I could answer, he asked, "Do you want a popsicle?" He didn't even register any of my internal screaming. He walked past like the house was a giant stage, and I was a background prop. There's a split second where you become someone else's sitcom punchline. My shoulders went hot. I tried to wrap a robe around myself with the grace of a contortionist, and answered, "No thanks," in what may have been the world's most fragile voice. The little brother shrugged and left. Later, while we were brushing our teeth, Jenna's dad walked by with a cup of coffee and asked, "You sure you don't want some muffin tomorrow morning?" I wanted to say, "I'm not naked anymore." And if I were, I would still pass on the muffin, but I smiled like an adult playing along with the world's most awkward improv. The open door thing isn't always this dramatic. More often it's a series of small invasions. Someone walks in while you're half changed. A family member says something about childhood photos, or you're rinsing your face and someone starts talking about their job interview history like nothing's happening. It's the accumulation that messes with you. After a while, you become hyper-aware of how visible you are, of how every mundane action is a public performance. One particular moment after that weekend stuck with me. It was Sunday morning, and we were all in the kitchen. I'd chosen a shirt I thought was safe, nothing dramatic, not a fashion statement. Jenna's dad stood in the doorway, mug in hand, and said in that dad voice that is part curiosity, part evaluation, morning, breakfast in 10. I wanted to respond, "Thanks, I'll bring my dignity," but instead I just said, "Great." The coffee scent lingered, like a metaphor. What makes the open-door policy so awkward is that it's a different worldview. To Jenna's family, privacy equated suspicion. To me, openness equated exposure. Kept stumbling over each other's norms like two people trying to walk down the same path at the same time. For the rest of that weekend, I learned to change by tucking my clothes into my bag and jumping into them like a person in a spy movie. I learned to plan my movements like a stage actor. By the time I left, I appreciated Jenna. She was warm and generous, and the kind of friend you could rant to about life. But the open-door policy felt like being under a microscope, not because anyone was malicious, but because love can sometimes look like surveillance. I left promising myself to never subject someone to that level of unintentional performance again without consent. Years later, Whenever I walk into someone's house and the bedroom door is open, I get a flashback. Usually it's just a little mental shutter clicking. That memory of reading a room and realizing halfway through that the entire house is reading you back. Privacy is a strange currency. Some families spend it freely, some hoard it. The awkward part comes in the exchange rate. If you've been in a house where boundaries are decided by philosophy rather than practicality, you know the feeling. It's never malicious. It's often earnest. But it can also make an ordinary act, like changing into pajamas, feel like a scene in absurdist play. And that's how I learned to keep a towel handy and never assume a door equals privacy. Okay, enough family policy. Let's shift to fauna. Specifically, the animal guests you didn't expect. Marcus had a house that felt like a museum of maybe net yet vintage objects, old door knockers, a stair runner that had seen better centuries, and a bowl of weird-shaped rocks by the front door labeled nature's marbles. Marcus loved reptiles. He'd mentioned, "I kind of like snakes." In the same tone, other people say, "I like coffee." I mentally translated that to cool hobby. I did not, in any possible mental model, translate that to owner-of-a-giant-python. We were 12. We were dumb about many things. I showed up with a plastic bag of gummy bears, the pinnacle of culinary sophistication at that age. Marcus greeted me at the door, and with the nonchalance of someone introducing a houseplant, said, "Oh yeah, don't mind Bella." I thought he meant the goldfish. I imagined a tiny fish. I therefore sat down and started to talk about school, hormones, the latest trading card ripoffs. The slithering started as a soft sound, like a scarf being dragged across linoleum. It was not loud, it was not sinister. It was a small, quiet undulation that made no sense, because I had never owned a scarf long enough to know its locomotion patterns. Then I looked down. There she was. 6 feet of smooth, beaded scales making a lazy S-shape across the carpet and toward my sneaker. My brain did that weird thing where it both recognizes disaster and thinks it is a television show. I made a noise that combined a squeak with a gasp, with the noise a bag of chips makes when you accidentally sit on it. Marcus's voice was calm like a podcast. Oh, she likes new people. He leaned down and patted Bella on the head like she was a dog. I could feel the floor tilt toward a new axis of panic. We've all had to conceal fear to maintain social grace, but this was advanced technique. I attempted to act casual while a muscle with no eyelids decided to investigate my laces. My foot was warm and weird, and I could feel the snake's muscles adjusting around my ankle. My internal monologue ran through a list of improbable scenarios that involved council meetings, urgent phone calls, and the Smithsonian. Marcus's family was helpful in the way that people who live with snakes are helpful. His mom, calm, wise, smelling faintly of peppermint, walked by, said it's fine, she's gentle. And then, as if answering a rhetorical prompt, put a bowl of cereal into the microwave. The house had a metric of normal where giant snakes were an ordinary punctuation mark. They had to physically remove Bella from my ankle. Marcus's dad came and, with the authority of someone who had once wrestled a garbage bag out of a basement drain, disentangled the snake. Everyone else reacted like the event was slightly more interesting than a commercial break. I, however, had been clinically confiscated by discomfort. After that day, I had 2 new habits. Confirm the tank is closed, and never ever assume I like reptiles as a light hobby. I learned to ask direct questions. Is the snake out? If the answer was no, I still eyed the staircase like it might be a slide for serpents. There is something deeply humbling about being voluntarily wrapped by an animal that thinks of you as a novelty. On the one hand, it's a story that builds character. On the other, it's a memory that sits in your chest and flutters like a nervous bird. When your friends laugh about remember that time you met Bella, you laugh too because you've learned the social script. But you also feel a little bit of your skin remembering that scale texture. It's a weird, tactile memory that doesn't fade easily. The awkwardness of that moment wasn't just about fear. It was the social calculus afterward. Did you scream? Did you cry? Did you call your parents? I did none of those things because I was 12, and survival at that age is measured in composure and gummy bears. I did, however, get a patchwork of new cautiousness and an anecdote no one could top at parties. If this taught me anything, it's twofold. 1. People who own reptiles have a different threshold for weird. And 2, always check the tank. Also, if you ever want to stump a kid, ask them what friendly regime looks like for a 6-foot snake. Their face will say the rest. Ah, the joys of house guests who breathe on your shoes. Speaking of shoes, the next one is about socks. You'll want to brace for that particular kind of shame. There's a certain cruelty in drawing attention to someone's feet. It's like revealing a small private economy of foot-related shame. For me, that moment came courtesy of a very nice carpet and the worst socks I owned. Liam's house was pristine in the way a museum is pristine. Not dusty, but curated. His mom had a way of rearranging furniture that made otherwise humble items look expensive. He asked me to come hang out after school. I was excited because Liam had the kind of gaming setup that made you feel like a professional athlete of embarrassment. As soon as I walked in, Liam's mom said the words that should have come with a warning. "Shoes off, please. This is common. People don't want street dirt on their rugs." I understand. The problem was my socks. They were the socks of someone who had been habitually allergic to laundry motivation. There was a hole the size of a small country on my left big toe. The hole was an architectural choice of the sock, not a functional design. I took my shoes off and tried to shuffle with dignity. The socks and their ailing toes are part of the human condition, I thought. We are all imperfect. But then Liam, in the tone of someone dropping a truth grenade, said, "Dude, your sock's got a hole." The sentence was as harmless as a statement about weather, but the delivery was surgical. I heard his little sister squeal like the moment had been comedic gold. I tried to pretend I couldn't feel the draft of exposure. The sock's hole became a narrative villain. The more I moved my foot, the more it performed like a character in a show. People began to see the toe, and then they acted like anthropologists discovering an artifact. Liam's dad came in, inspected the toe like one might inspect an exotic fruit, and said, "Oh, you've got a vent there," as if that was an upgrade. For the rest of the night, every time I shifted on the couch, someone would glance at my socks, and then at me. It was subtle mockery. It was the kind of ribbing that's meant to be affectionate, but in the moment it felt like public humiliation. I remember plotting a dinner where I would spontaneously combust into new socks, but lacking the courage to ask for the luxury of time to depart. What made it worse was the environment. Shoes-off homes carry with them a standard of care. You feel the air pressure of judgment against your fabric choices. In hindsight, I could have laughed more, but in the moment, shame elbowed in. I envied people whose sock holes were cleverly concealed, or who could pass a man named humiliation without glancing back. Left early that night. It's not like a dramatic escape, but a small exit. A text to Liam later to say, "Thanks for the hangout." And a dash to my laundry basket, like it was the warm embrace of someone who'd just learned to forgive. I bought new socks after that. The socks were better. I hugged my toes like they were sorry for what had happened. I wore them proudly like a small redemption arc. There's a lesson in all of this that is both practical and charming. If you are invited to a shoes-off house, have socks that are not in the middle of their final performance. Also be kind. A little teasing is human, but be gentle. There's a reason socks make for an easy target. They're honest. They reveal the parts of us we keep covered. So if you ever see someone with a hole in their sock at a friend's place, offer them a pair or at least a compliment that feels like a rescue mission. You'll make a little empathy deposit into the world's bank. That's footwear woes. Next, the classic. You break something you absolutely shouldn't have. This one is a slow burn shame story that ends with me offering to work off the damage and my friend. His dad giving me the long-suffering look that I still get in flashbacks. It was Sophie's 13th birthday. She had a house that smelled like vanilla, and at the time felt like the kind of comfortable middle-class sanctuary where you never slam doors. We had a group sleepover, and we'd set up shop in the living room, unfurling blankets and stacking chips like a buffet for the socially anxious. By the third movie, I'd leaned back in my chair without thinking about physics or the location of fragile heirlooms. The chair tipped. It's such a simple action. A misjudged backward momentum, but in my brain, it happened in slow motion. I felt the weight shift. I heard the plastic top of my chair scrape the hardwood, and then the world narrowed down to a single sound. Shattering glass, the punctuation mark on the sentence that was my social life for the next week. The vase had been on a cabinet behind me, not directly in the path of my chair, but my backward momentum created a chain reaction. A figurine teetered, then the figurine nudged the vase. The vase hit the floor in crystalline fragments, 1,000 little daggers of glittering mistake. Time spilled. Sophie's mom came in, and her face folded into a kaleidoscope of expressions. Surprise, sadness, a historically muffled frustration, and then an attempt at composure. She said softly, "Oh, no yelling, no screaming, just a precise oh." It was the kind oh of someone cataloging a loss. I became several versions of myself in the following seconds. The apologizing kid, the calculating kid, the kid who tries to offer the $5 he has in his pocket, like it could ever repair a thing made with generations in mind. I said the words everyone says in that moment. I'm so sorry. I offered to pay. I offered to do chores. I offered ridiculous things that make no logistical sense, like promising to intern as a vase maker in exchange for forgiveness. Sophie was kind in a way children can be, sympathetic but also aware of social reality. She patted my arm and said things like, "It's okay, accidents happen." While her dad did the human equivalent of a slow exhale. He wore a look like a man who had been introduced to destruction before and had learned stoicism. What followed was the ritual of apology. I wrote a letter because I thought paperwork had a sincerity no spoken apology could match. I showed her mom the crumpled paper with earnest sentences that looked like a first-year apology in a high school play. She accepted and asked for my help cleaning the mess. That was the only way she could accept, to see me make right in some small physical way. I scrubbed the floor on my knees with a rag that was surely not built for the existential weight of my guilt. To this day, I am ashamed of my backward lean. It seems trivial to an outsider, yet inside that living room, it was a moral earthquake. For days afterward, people would throw accidental glances in my direction. I felt like a walking cautionary tale. My attempts at humor were stilted. My voice had the kind of sheepishness that made any new comment feel like a potential insult to the memory of the shattered vase. Later, months later, years later, you learn how to integrate these small disgraces into your narrative. The vase was replaced eventually. The family moved. New furniture took the place of old. The story twisted into something that people tell when you visit, like a town anecdote. But it was a long while before I could be around glass without hearing a mental echo of the crash. Here's the thing about that moment. It taught me humility and also taught me the power of small reparations. You can't buy back generational things with cash in your pocket as a youth, but you can show up, hold a mop, and really mean your apology. I learned to be more careful in other people's houses, to treat other people's objects like a sacred deposit. I also learned that people are often kinder than your shame predicts. They may be hurt, but they will often accept you back if you show willing to be repaired. So yeah, the vase hated me. I hated that for a while. Then I learned to laugh about it. Not at the object, but at the shape of human embarrassment. It's a story I tell when I want to remind myself how to be careful and how to be forgiven. We're halfway through now. The next stories are a mix of wardrobe disasters, mistaken houses, food crime, and the classic, I found something I shouldn't have. Stick with me. We're getting to the good weird stuff. This one is theater, spectacle, and the specific kind of cringe that happens when your body decides wardrobe physics should be tested in front of an audience. It was prom pre-party night, and my friend Ari had this house that was huge in the way of friendly neighbor. This house is huge, open concept, polished floors, and light fixtures that made you feel like you were inside a jewelry store. The night was bubbling with teenage nervous energy, corsages wrapped in tissue, hair gelled into brave new heights, and playlists that cycled between earnest slow songs and bangers no adult should know the lyrics to. I was helping Ari and her sister get ready because apparently the way you prove your friendship is by doing each other's makeup and failing at eyeliner. At one point, we decided to take some photos, because that's a non-negotiable requirement of modern social rituals. I had a jacket on, one I thought was flattering and safe. We were in the living room in a swirl of hairspray and giggling. Then the zipper split. Not a slow, graceful unzip. It was a theatrical failure, a sound like a book falling off a shelf. In 1 second, the jacket seemed betrayed its stitches, and the world briefly became air-conditioned exposure. I got a spike of adrenaline of the "this is happening in 4,000" variety. Everyone gasped. Then we froze. Then someone tried to help by grabbing the jacket and apologizing for modern fashion. Ari's cousin somehow had a phone out and, to my horror, it had already recorded a 10-second clip that would later become an artifact of my teenage scalp in a garment. I now considered treacherous. In that moment, I realized the internet would remember me as the person whose jacket exploded pre-dance. I instinctively tried to hem and haw my way into dignity by laughing like it was part of the night's planned entertainment. While my internal monologue cataloged escape routes, we adapted, as teenagers do. Someone draped a robe around me, someone else held a cushion in front of the gap, and a heroic friend zipped me into something else like we were in a quick-change sketch. The crisis was averted, but the footage existed, of course. In the later world of social posts and memory compilations, I remained a potential meme. There's a specific kind of awkwardness that's made worse by cameras. It compresses the timeline. What would have been a messy 3-minute incident becomes a 30-second public artifact that people can watch and laugh at later. At the time, I was furious at fashion more than myself. Later, I was embarrassed at my own face in that recording, the slightly surprised expression that looked like I did not consent to this publicity. We made it to prom. I danced. People were kind. But I carried the jacket memory as one of those formative humiliations that teach you. One always check zippers too. Accept your friends bringing towels and robes. 3. Try to be the kind of friend who helps someone change rather than the one who records the incident. At the after party, the clip made the rounds. The people showed up innocently as if rewatching a small comedy. I laughed along, because there's grace in laughing at your younger self. It's also oddly freeing to have a moment you can no longer control. Years after, someone would mention it like a fond legend at a reunion, and I'd say, yes, that jacket had commitment issues. And we'd all laugh, because embarrassment has the tendency to soften over time into a shared story. So if you ever feel small because a zipper betrayed you in front of people, remember this. The opening you fear becomes part of the social fabric. And if your friends are true, they'll have a robe ready. Next, a story where a text message about come over goes disastrously wrong, and I ended up in the wrong house. You'll love the absurdity of this one. This is one of those stories where technology conspires to turn a normal evening into the scene of a procedural sitcom. It's less dramatic than a crime show and more like an appetizer of chaos. It was a Saturday evening, and I was supposed to go to my friend Naomi's place for a small gathering. She texted, "Come over, we're in the den." She didn't send an address because we were neighbors. I left my house and walked the 3 blocks to what I thought was her street. I forgot in that moment the exact numbering of houses. The neighborhood had a handful of very similar brown houses with porches and wind chimes. I picked the wrong one. Not maliciously, I just misremembered. I knocked. The door opened, and a middle-aged man peered at me with the kind of face people get when their doorbell becomes a variable in a game show. He was polite, but confused. A woman behind him looked at me like I'd offered to sell them an unnecessary appliance. I slammed into the kind of protocol you only get when the wrong person answers the door. "I'm looking for Naomi." "Is she?" He looked at me like the question was incomplete as a sentence. Turns out I was at a neighbor's book club night. They were not Naomi. They gave me directions to the house that was 2 doors down. I was apologetic and offered a shaky laugh, and then, in a move I now regret, I texted Naomi. "I'm at some weird house." She responded with a crying laugh emoji and even more mortifyingly said, "Which one?" I had to describe my current position like I was giving coordinates for lost treasure. I walked across the lawn, feeling like a character in a late-night comedy where everyone else knows the lines and you, Dan. T. I knocked again at the correct house, and Naomi answered with a grin, like she'd been doing this waiting for friends thing since before time. She said, "Ha, you at the wrong place?" I wanted to die, or at least temporarily relocate to a spot under the nearest shrub. She laughed it off and ushered me in. The night was fine, but then Naomi's cousin, soft-spoken but deadly efficient jokester, saw text threads popping up on my phone because I'd left it unlocked. He looked at the glowing screen and read aloud, "I'm at some weird house." And then another friend added, "Which one?" The room filled with laughter, as if the universe had accidentally become meta. At one point someone joked, "When you doorbell dash the wrong book club, do you get an honorary membership?" I was awarded, in the end, a nickname I did not ask for, Wrong House Walker. And the neighbor who initially answered the door? They waved whenever they saw me the next time I passed. And I learned that their book club actually appreciated a stranger's intrusion because they got a funny story. Naive though I was, the Wrong House episode turned into a social currency. People liked telling it because it was small and harmless, and it made me more human in my own memory. There's a particular humbling grace to being politely redirected by a stranger in a residential area. You realize you're not that important, but then you also realize you're part of a network of people who will eventually share your misstep in a way that becomes affection rather than ridicule. It's what neighborhoods were probably invented for. To hold each other, the small mistakes, and laugh. I still check house numbers now. I also occasionally ring a wrong door on purpose to see if the book club is still as lively. Moral: double check the address and be ready to be part of someone else's anecdote. Next, I caught myself eating something I wasn't supposed to, and it turned into a family diplomatic situation. It's a small saga of guilt and candor. Food is sacred when you're a guest in someone else's house. That sacredness dissolves entirely when you're 13, sugar-deprived, and the object in question looks like an edible art installation. We were at my friend Priya's house after school. Her mom had baked cupcakes, the kind that seemed plucked from a bakery window. Perfect swirls, edible glitter, the whole fantasy. The cupcakes were on the counter, in a neat arrangement that could have been a still life. I remember seeing them and thinking, with adolescent honesty, I need that. Priya's mom said, "Help yourself," in the kind of voice that is both free and meant to be theatrically generous. For a moment, I believed in the generosity. Then I remembered I was the last person in our group who had not yet taken one. My heart did that little hop where you weigh desire versus consequence. I took one. It was excellent, sugary joy and sprinkles like confetti. I ate it standing at the counter, sugar dusting my lips like a mugger in frosting. At that exact moment, Priya's grandma walked in and said in a voice like a gavel, "Oh, I thought those were for tomorrow's party." Priya's mom blinked like someone had pulled a curtain over her eyes. A slow-moving pause like syrup settled across the room. It gets wild after that. There is a small, culturally specific choreography about food, elders, and implied permission. Priya's mom was mortified but not angry. She said, "Oh," I thought. My mouth was full of cake and guilt. I tried to politely hand the empty wrapper to the garbage with the dignity of someone who, just been discovered in the act. Priya's grandma gave me a long look that compressed the past 60 years of experience into one arch of an eyebrow. "You like it?" she asked. My options were limited. I could confess immediately, which would be honorable. I could attempt to pretend I had always had permission, which would be both cowardly and obvious. I chose a middle path. I nodded vigorously and offered to go buy ingredients to replace them. Priya's mom refused, making polite motions about it's fine. And then the house proceeded to treat me like a person who had momentarily trespassed the cupcake's territory, but had enough remorse to become a charming anecdote later. For the rest of the afternoon, Priya's grandma teased me gently. She called me Cupcake Bandit in a tone that made me feel like I'd have been inducted into a small myth. Later I felt bad and offered to help bake replacements, which we did. There's something healing about reparations that involves shared baking. We made a second batch, and as I mixed batter and spilled flour on the counter, I realized that my humiliation had turned into an opportunity to bond. Priya's grandma showed me how to make a swirl that didn't collapse. Priya's mom told me stories about the first time she had made cupcakes. We cooked, laughed, and cleaned. It was wholesome. In hindsight, the awkwardness was the gateway. The thing I learned was, when you do something small and stupid in someone's house, the right reaction is to be honest and to help fix it in a way that adds value. Priya's grandmother's initial glare turned into a fond nickname in a later check-in. "How are you, Cupcake Bandit?" It's the kind of memory that ages like jam. So if you ever wander into a house and a delicious-looking baked good winks at you, with frosting ambition, ask. If you can't, be ready to offer flour and apology, and your willingness to stay and bake the world a better place. People will forgive, and sometimes they'll invite you back to the table. Last two stories are a pair. One about finding something private and weird, and one about being mistaken for a different role in someone's home. They both end with reflection. The cherry on top of these awkward Sunday stories, A friend's house is supposed to be a place of relaxed truth, where your secrets can exist in good company. But sometimes houses hide stranger things. Closets full of trophies, photo walls dedicated to exes, or, in my friend Devin's case, a whole room that felt like it had been curated by an eccentric archivist. We were teenagers, bored and curious, and Devin invited me to his attic because he wanted to show me something he found in a thrift store. The attic smelled like old paper, cedar, and memory. He opened a door and invited me in like a magician revealing a trick. He said, "I can't believe I found this." The room was dim and small, and then I saw the wall. It wasn't offensive. It was just specific. The wall had dozens of Polaroids, not of vacations or pets or sunsets, but of me. Not all the photos were flattering. Some were my teenage face at awkward angles from parties we'd attended together. At first I laughed because who collects unflattering photos of friends? But then I realized the wall was not just me. It had pictures of me at a pool party where I'd assumed no one took pictures, a picture of me asleep on a couch, a photo of me mid-sneeze. The whole wall read like a visual diary of private moments, where I was prepared to be the subject. Turns out Devin had been a documentarian in miniature. He had a love for capturing candid snaps at gatherings, and in his mind, this was how you made friendships permanent. In my mind, I was a character in a secret narrative I hadn't consented to. The discovery felt like finding someone had been taking notes during your life without permission. I remember my heart thudding and an odd sense of being seen without having ever signed a release. I felt naked in a way that had nothing to do with clothes. Devin looked embarrassed when he saw my reaction. He said apologetically, "I didn't mean anything creepy by it. I just like how real you look." He understood that real and creepy live on the same latitude sometimes. We had a conversation that turned into a lesson. I told him that I didn't like the photos up there. He listened. He was genuinely surprised. In his head, this was a tribute. In my head, it was an invasion. We compromised like careful diplomats. He took the wall down. He offered to delete photos I wanted gone. We came to terms. We ended up creating a shared album where the candid photos we both consented to were saved and the others were deleted. The awkwardness was not the existence of the photos per se, but the way the photos had been curated without conversation. It taught me boundaries and taught Devin consent. It also taught me that modern friendship sometimes requires explicit permissions, where we previously assumed implicit trust. Time healed it. We laughed about it later. The wall was gone, replaced with a guitar and a small plant. We'd occasionally joke about the museum. But the memory of being unasked forly cataloged remained a small, instructive discomfort. If there's one thing to take away from this, it's, friend, ask before you archive. If you take pictures, ask whether the subject wants to be the exhibit. Consent matters even in the micro-catalogs of everyday life. And now, the final story. A big, goofy misunderstanding that ends with me getting roped into a role I didn't want and learning about humility in the process. You know how sometimes your presence is mistaken for your vocation? That's how I wound up recognized as a competent adult the night I least felt like one. I was at my friend Elise's for a movie night. Elise was the organized type, the one who had color-coded binders for her hobbies. Her little cousin came over, a bright-eyed kid named Marco, who was the kind of child that detonates energy into a room. Elise's mom was in the kitchen making snacks. At some point she asked me casually, as if she were asking the weather, "Do you mind helping keep an eye on Marco for a minute?" "I need to answer the door." I blinked. I had not been appointed by any recognized authority to supervise children. But her question assumed I had the necessary patience and training. What followed was the slow accretion of responsibility, said sure, which was a decision made from politeness and a touch of cowardice about saying no. Marco was adorable and hyperactive and familiar in that I know this person enough to like them way.
At first, things were fine.
We watched a cartoon. We did a puzzle. He asked me why my eyebrows looked like that. Then Elise's mom kept going out. Each time she stepped out of the room, she left me with a look like she was installing me with the powers of a person who'd read a manual on childcare. I began to understand this is how people become accidental adults. There is a peculiar pressure to perform when you've been handed responsibility you didn't expect. You must become calm, problem-solving, patient, all the things your teenage self is not. Marco wanted snacks that matched his aesthetic. Specifically, pretzels arranged in a shape like a star. He wanted a story about a dragon that didn't fight but knitted sweaters. Simple tasks became Samaric as I attempted to be simultaneously playful, authoritative, and fun. At one point, Marco asked to go to the backyard. I agree, and he ran out. He returned 5 minutes later, carrying a frog and a plastic cup, as if prize collecting from nature were an Olympic sport. The frog's presence escalated my responsibility into a moral dilemma. I handled it like a diplomat, returning the frog to its environment, explaining the science of letting frogs live free. Marco nodded like a tiny philosopher. I breathed. Lisa's mom finally came back and looked at me like I had performed a small miracle. Thanks, she said, like I had been a volunteer at a baby rescue shelter. I said, no problem, and felt the interior bloom of a surprising pride. Little did I know the consequence would be a new nickname among Elise's family. We can leave him with that one. I had accidentally proven myself domestically competent. The awkwardness came later, when my friends teased me. Have you suddenly learned to cook mac and cheese, babysit a troop of infants, and fold fitted sheets? They asked. I had to reckon with this new, somewhat flattering, but also suspiciously adult identity. It lodged in my social currency like a new coin. People began to ask me to help with things, expecting the calm patience I demonstrated at one particular moment under time pressure. What did I learn? That people will elevate you quickly if you show even a shred of competence, and that sometimes being useful is a subtle kind of validation you didn't know you wanted. The embarrassment was mild. It felt odd to be cast in a role I hadn't auditioned for, but the warmth of Elise's mom calling me trustworthy was oddly affirming. A year later, when Elise's baby brother was born, she texted me, "You're top candidate for occasional babysitting." I laughed, accepted once. I learned more about responsibility, less about mastery. The awkwardness of being misidentified turned into a quiet confidence that maybe I could be relied on. So the final lesson. When someone hands you responsibility in their house, don't overthink it. Say yes if you can, try your best, and accept the small, surprising dignity that comes with being helpful, even if you didn't know you had it in you. And that's our set. 10 very awkward, very human moments, all at a friend's house, the places where we feel safe enough to be ourselves, and sometimes weird enough to be slightly mortified. If you enjoyed these and want a part 2, tell me which one made you squirm the most. Was it the toilet, the snake, the secret photo wall, or the cupcake incident? If you liked the video, hit like, subscribe, and ring that bell. Drop a comment telling us where you're rewatching from and what your most awkward friend's house moment was. We read all of them. And if yours is juicy, we might tell it anonymously in the next video. Thanks for listening. Take care of your socks, check the toilets, always ask before you archive photos. And if someone hands you a cupcake, well, maybe ask who it's for first. See you next time.